Good morning on this Sunday, July 16th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. The Department of Justice opens an investigation into the Fulton County Jail. Also, a Democratic state lawmaker says she faced harassment and intimidation for disagreeing with members of her own party, so she switched to the GOP. And UGA head football coach Kirby Smart talks to reporters about problems plaguing his program. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Martha are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
This week, news of another inmate death at the Atlanta City Jail, which was being patrolled by Fulton County deputies. This as the U.S. Justice Department announces a civil rights investigation. The Department of Justice says that after an extensive review of publicly available information, it found significant justification to open an investigation into the Fulton County Jail. This comes after the death of LaShawn Thompson, who died last year, covered in bed bugs.
This investigation will be comprehensive. We will examine living conditions in the Fulton County Jail, access to medical care and mental health care, use of excessive force by staff, and conditions that may give rise to violence between people incarcerated at the facility.
Phase 4 LaShawn Thompson released a statement saying in part, quote, "It is our prayer that the DOJ confirms the clear pattern of negligence and abuse that happens in Fulton County and swiftly ends it so that no other family experiences this devastation." Now let's run the table on this, starting with Martha this week.
Look, it needs to be done. The investigation needs to be done. We also in Habersham County have the GBI investigating a similar situation of a death in the jail. So look, we need oversight in these county jails. These folks are in detention centers. That means they have not been convicted yet. They have certain rights and privileges that need to be protected, and this is the right thing to do.
Theron, I would say it's about time, but this isn't the first time that the feds have investigated conditions at the Fulton County Jail. There was a consent decree that ended about 8 years ago, and that reportedly cost Fulton County taxpayers about $1 billion. So where do we go from here?
Well, Lori, also there was a jail feasibility study done in March of 2023, and it sort of showed a lot of what the sheriff has been saying, is that we have deplorable conditions, dilapidated infrastructure, and the conditions of the jail need to be improved. And to be, sort of fair to the sheriff, I mean, he campaigned on the fact that he wants to go in and try to make the conditions better for the inmates who are awaiting trial. But I think the other thing that's really important here is that as he's welcomed this investigation, I think that that's important, but also making sure that what we're doing now with the current infrastructure he has, and I think that's what the sheriff is trying to do. He's trying to do everything he can to raise the alarm, but also to hire new people. He's fired people, he's brought some new people in, he's promoted people, he's demoted people. And so ultimately, I think that this investigation is going to probably be comprehensive and sort of uncover some things that we don't know, but I think a lot of what we already know is in that feasibility study that was done in March of this year.
Well, I mean, is this just going to get more expensive, Phil? I mean, is it time to just start over and just build a new jail? Because you can't keep putting Band-Aids on the Fulton County Jail.
You were reading my mind, and I think you all made some good points. And yes, ultimately, it's the Fulton County Commission that's going to have to step up. I'm glad they're doing the investigation. It's way overdue. It's just they're going to have to bite the bullet. We're going to have a bond issue. We're going to have a modern jail. We all agree this is reprehensible.
And it's just, we talk about it probably at least once a month on the show. So it's like, come on, somebody solve the problem once and for all, Melita.
Well, the county commission has just been kicking the can down the road. And that last consent decree, as you said, was very expensive. This one could end up in a consent decree that's very expensive, and that amount of money combined could have built the new jail. So kicking the can down the road is not a good public policy, and it's not a good way to solve problems. And certainly, as we've all said, being in pretrial detention should never be a death sentence.
All right, moving on and switching gears to Governor Kemp, who once again has been mentioned in national Republican circles about a possible White House run. The governor has responded saying he's focused on Georgia and beating President Joe Biden in 2024. Phil, the governor has not made any trips or visits to New Hampshire or Iowa. I mean, do you see any scenario where he puts his name in for president?
I don't, unless there's some sort of deadlocked national convention, but I don't see that either. But it is very flattering to the governor. I think he's been a pretty good governor by and large, and so people around the country are looking at Georgia as a model. You know, one of the first governors to keep the state open. We have an excellent economic record. We've had a good legislative record with the Republican legislature. So I think it's great. I'm sure he's smiling, but no, I want him to run against Senator John Ossoff, and I think he's positioning himself. He doesn't have the infrastructure for a national campaign, but he is building up wonderful infrastructure with a statewide campaign.
Martha?
I don't think he will run, and I think what he's focused on is not only winning in 2024, but winning up and down the ticket in 2024 to show that 2020 was an anomaly in Georgia politics, that he came and won up and down the ticket in 2022. That's what he wants to do in 2024, and then he could build on something for 2026, but it's a long way off. If anybody says they know what's going to happen in 2026, they're lying.
Or 2024 for that matter.
That's right.
Theron, I saw you smirking at Martha.
You know, I think Phil is right. Look, the governor is playing this very, in a sophisticated way. He sort of let it go out there, hey, he's being recruited. And for our viewers, the reason that this theme has picked up to try to encourage Brian Kemp to run for president is because there are some Republicans who don't want Donald Trump to be their nominee. And so Ron DeSantis can't do it. Tim Scott. You got now Chris Christie in the race, Nikki Haley, all of these people, Mike Pence. And so the recruitment efforts were saying, okay, who can stop Donald Trump? And I think Governor Kemp has been one of those people. But I think, you know what I'm going to say, Lori. Yeah. The person that I think is the decision maker in that household is Marty Kemp and the girls. And while I did see Marty recently at Atlanta Rotary, and she was talking about a very important issue around human trafficking and the Grace Commission, that she's been doing. But I think that to Phil's point and to Martha's point, he's going to let this spotlight continue to come, but the question is, how are you going to stop Trump? And if he doesn't do it, then I don't know who the Republicans have.
Well, Melita, he is sitting pretty right now, and a shout out to Mrs. Kemp, because we know she does watch the show. But, Melita, there are Republicans who don't want to see former President Trump winning, right, the GOP primary, yet none of the other Republican candidates are building any momentum in the polls, and that's why Governor Kemp's name keeps getting mentioned.
Well, and I think the comparisons between Governor Kemp and DeSantis are particularly sharp. And in talking about Mrs. Kemp versus Mrs. DeSantis, Mrs. Kemp comes across in a very personable way, in a very favorable way in the causes that she's championed. Mrs. DeSantis is coming across in a kind of cold, calculating, power-grabbing way of almost a modern Lady Macbeth. And so that's kind of interesting. But Governor Kemp is walking back these national news stories, but they don't come out of a vacuum. Somebody is being a Kemp whisperer to the national media. And I look forward to seeing in future disclosure reports for his PAC who's been doing his PR, because they've been very effective in planting these stories.
All right, Martha, I need to come back to you because there's been a lot of criticism of Mrs. DeSantis.
And I think it's very unfair, okay? It's because they're concerned about Ron DeSantis. Not a vote has been cast yet. No, he hasn't gotten the traction that people have wanted, but it seems like it's okay. It sounds like talking points out of, I don't know, Mother Jones or something like that about her, the New York Times, that kind of thing. It's not appropriate. It's not appropriate. The woman's less than a year out of cancer, dealing with cancer. I don't think it's fair to go after her in that way.
Theron, is it fair? I mean, she did put herself out there because she is in ads for her husband, but is it fair to attack her?
I'm not that old, but I do believe in the traditional sort of style of politics is that the spouses are sort of off limits, right? But when you choose to engage yourself in the campaign, and this is a contact sport, and you have to be prepared for some of the criticism that comes your way. I sympathize with what Martha just said. I had no idea that she was, 1 year out of cancer. But at the same time, that's the decision that the household makes when you decide to run for president of the United States of America. And we've seen spouses get criticized. We've seen spouses be, as we just talked about, First Lady Marty Kemp being an asset to the campaign. So it kind of comes along with the territory.
Phil, final word.
Well, I think that obviously they're public figures. And so they are, you can have mean and vicious criticism, and that's the way it goes with the territory. And so I do think it's unfair. I think she's got some charisma, probably more than Ron DeSantis. And I think that she's an asset.
The problem is.
She's an asset to the campaign.
All right, we'll leave it there. Up next, a Georgia state rep becomes the first Republican African-American woman to ever serve in the state house after she switches parties. We'll discuss next.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
This week, a Georgia state legislator from Atlanta switched to the Republican Party on Tuesday after being at odds with Democrats on issues including her support for school vouchers and disciplining prosecutors. Their in-state rep Misha Maynor says she faced harassment and intimidation from Democrats when she broke with them on some key issues.
She did. And I talked about it on the show. And some of those Democrats privately, I sort of shared that I think that we should not be going after your colleagues, and particularly African-American women, in that way. But when I hear the word crucify, I don't think that no one sort of crucified her. They did go after her and sort of criticize her on some votes. So the next thing is you're going to ask me probably is that am I surprised with the move? I'm not. I'm very disappointed because I know Representative Maynor personally. I think that she came in and had some Republican votes, and so I'm not surprised that she actually did it. But the people that I sympathize with the most are the people in the district who voted for her to go in a representative democracy to represent them in the state house. She has turned her back on them. For her to say, I'm going to switch midterm, now you leave a 90% plus Democratic district with a Republican representative. So if she's thinking that she can run as a Republican and win, that's inconceivable. Last thing I'll say is this. I grew up in the projects in Athens, right? And, I would oftentimes ask my friends or people to, participate in these team sports like basketball and football. And if somebody actually had the ball, if the game went wrong, or even on this show, when I leave here frustrated at my colleagues, I don't quit. I don't go and switch to the other party. I persevere. And if it was truly deeply rooted into school choice, then she could have actually tried to get more Democrats to vote in a way, because the bill, Senate Bill 233, that she voted for, didn't fail in the legislature because Democrats defeated it. There were some Republicans that defeated it as well. So I just think that she could have really worked on those issues that she cared about as a Democrat, or at least finished out your term.
Martha, you interviewed her this week.
Yeah, my big concern is if you go back to 2000, the first question that Al Gore was asked in his town hall was by a black mother about school choice. African American moms have been supporting school choice for a long time, and they've been told by the Democratic caucus that their ideas are bad. And my big problem with how she was treated is it was a white state senator, Democrat, big in the caucus, that went after her with a blank check from Sandy Springs, where he's got plenty of school choice, and he goes after her. It seemed a little pejorative to me. And I'm not saying that she did the best thing by switching parties. I don't know that. Only time will tell. Okay, but I don't think she was treated fairly. And I said on the show I would give her money, and you know what? The next day she came up to Gainesville and got my check. Okay, so
she held you to it.
That's right. And she was a Democrat when I gave her that money. And I think she could have stood up for school choice. As a Democrat or as a Republican, but she felt more welcome by the Republican Party. And I really think Democrats need to look at their caucuses and say, okay, are we going to allow people to be independent when they vote with us 85% of the time? Which she did. She just didn't vote on those two things.
Melita, is there room for a difference of opinion in the Democratic Party?
There is room, and many people find a way to work with their colleagues in a collegial way that allows them to remain a part of the team. But she departed from the party on some very important issues, and some of the same reasons that she did not get along well with Democrats may play themselves out after her 15 minutes of fame as a Republican ends. And some of the Republicans may well have some of the same issues.
Phil, 89% of voters, as Theron mentioned, in her district back President Biden. Are the chances of her getting reelected in that district slim to none?
If I was her consultant, I would have said, stay in the Democratic Party and be a real thorn in their side, and attack them for, she's for against defunding the police. That was another thing besides parental school choice. But she didn't listen to folks like me, and so she's now a Republican. It's going to be very, very tough for her to get reelected, but I think that she'll have a platform to speak out.
Quickly, Theron,
real quick, I think that the thing that, to Martha's point, Democrats, we better wake up. All right, there is a organized movement to try to recruit African Americans, and we need to have a better vetting process when we choose these candidates that are running for office to make sure that they stick with the Democratic Party.
All right,
And
turning
a
to
better vetting process on Democratic leadership, and our Republican leadership does it sometimes too. In this case, we're talking about Democrats, but they need to be a little more open and not attack so publicly and make you go the party line on
All
the
right,
caucus.
I got to leave it there.
Sorry,
I got to leave it there because I got to get to this next issue. Turning to a bizarre case out of South Fulton where the mayor there is out on bond after getting arrested on charges of criminal trespass and burglary. Mayor Khalid Kamal apologized for the negative attention brought to the city. Melita, this was a bizarre case.
It is a bizarre case, but you know, years ago, people would go into houses under construction or vacant houses and look at them as potential, but that's just kind of become very dangerous. But he has had run-ins with his city council over a number of issues, and his tenure as mayor has been marked by controversy.
Phil.
Yeah, I think that you've got all these fellow Democrats have been complaining about him. By the way, he's a socialist. I'm always happy when a socialist goes down the drain. But anyhow, it didn't make any sense what he was talking about. The guy just is kind of off his rocker.
Darren.
Yeah, this is bizarre. And shout out to Dieter Dukes, who I think was the only reporter who got a chance to actually interview him as he was leaving the precinct. But, you know, I get the trespassing. Clearly, you're on someone's property. You're not supposed to be there.
I don't understand the burglary.
That's why, you know, and I'm going to say this to, you know, don't rush to judgment on these charges. but to Melita's point, I mean, this has been a mayor who beat an incumbent mayor and has been sort of at odds back and forth. And so I think it's a distraction for the city. And I know people who live in the city of South Fulton who want to make sure that, you know, things like jobs and public safety and infrastructure are at the top of the list.
Martha?
It's, you know, I don't understand the whole story, meaning that he seems like he shouldn't have been on the property, and I'm with Theron. I understand the trespassing. I don't understand the burglary.
Well, maybe some more details will emerge this week. All right, up next, UGA football coach Kirby Smart answers questions about off-field issues plaguing his program in recent months.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
This week, UGA football coach Kirby Smart held a news conference this week to refute claims from the AJC that the program was rallying around players accused of abusing women. Phil, the attorney for UGA's Athletic Association, wrote a lengthy letter to the AJC demanding a retraction. And I know we have said all along this news conference should have come in January and not now.
You're absolutely right. And you always try to get ahead of a story, a negative story.
And don't give reporters a reason to dig when you ignore them.
Absolutely, Lori, you're right. But that was a 9-page stinging letter by the attorney for the Athletic Association. And I think it's disgusting that the AJC, they always tout their ethics and code of ethics, they didn't run large portions of the letter. I didn't even see the word retraction in the AJC, which is what the attorney asked for. Why did he ask for it? Alan Judd has done a series of articles over the last 6 months. He's the reporter for the AJC. And what was given example by example is Judd actually twisted things, according to the attorney. This is not me talking. He lied about things. This is not me. That's the attorney. There was bias. That's what the attorney said. And all the AJC, as this is being taped, says, oh, we're just reviewing the letter. So I think that I learned as a journalist, there's 2 sides to every story and often 3 and 4. And they only did one side of the story.
Theron, Coach Smart also talked about the speeding issue and admitting finally that they haven't been able to get a handle on this problem with his players.
Well, let's go back to the sexual assault claims. And I want to say this, that I think that the University of Georgia, if they are not taking these claims seriously, they need to actually make sure that they communicate with the public about what happens when someone says, hey, in this case, women, I've been sexually assaulted by a football player. Now, you got to do an investigation. So to me, that was the one that sort of I think they had to move on. As far as the speeding, Laura, you know, I grew up in Athens. I mean, Barnett Shoals Road, all these roads. I mean, you know, racing has been going on in Athens for a very long time. And so we pretty much on this show said, hey, come on and talk about the culture. And Coach Smart said there was nothing wrong with the culture. Now, I did get a chance to talk to President Moorhead, and I think that, you know, he and others have been saying, all right, we got to make sure that we communicate and make sure that the parents and the students feel like there's policies in place to move forward. And so I want to commend Coach Smart for finally doing doing the press conference, but what I'm more concerned about now is how are you going to continue to talk about the changes that you're making internally to make sure that this program can win championships? Because I do want a three-peat, but at the same time, make sure that we have a code and a culture that everyone can support.
Martha, transparency just goes a long way.
It has to be transparency, and I don't think anybody's surprised that young men with fast cars are going to speed, okay, that are college age.
And they're getting money.
And they're
so
getting money to do it.
As he said, they're going to buy fast cars.
And we need to watch three things. There's a lot of things going on. We got to watch what's happening with NIL and how they're going to regulate that, and if they're going to be able to regulate. And there's some bipartisan bills going through the House and the Senate related to that. On the sexual assault stuff, I do think that if you can believe the lawyer and with the documentation he provided, UGA did take action, and they took quick action, and they took people off the roster. And you didn't hear from these folks, so they did, but they should have touted that a little bit. I mean, you don't brag about it, but you say, here's what happened, here's what we do. Tell it first, tell it yourself, tell it all.
Absolutely. Melita.
Well, in his press conference, he missed an opportunity. He said, my coaching staff talks about the speeding every week. But he didn't follow up and say, and this is what we're doing, 1, 2, 3.
And what are the consequences? If
And
you're
these-
going 20 miles or 30 miles per hour over the speed limit, that's a super speeder.
Yeah, so they are missing the opportunity to both shift public perception and shift player perception about consequences for bad behavior.
All right, we'll leave it there. This week, we're remembering one of our own. Bill Shipp was a panelist here on the Georgia Gang for a decade, worked at the AJC before starting his own political newsletter known as Bill Shipp's Georgia. I know everybody wants to say something. I remember him. He was very intimidating to this little cub reporter when I started in my 20s in the Atlanta market. Melita.
Well, you know, Shipp's he was a little bit intimidating, but beneath that gruff exterior was a very warm heart and a deep love for Georgia. And his talent, he wielded words like surgeons used scalpels or lasers, as the case may be. And you could see that even when he was a managing editor of the Red and Black at UGA. The stuff he wrote about Horace Ward, who would later become a federal judge, was just brilliantly done, far above the level of a normal college student.
Phil.
Well, as a fellow journalist, he was an editor, he was an author, he was a writer, a good investigative reporter, by the way, and of course a panelist on the show. He was almost as good a debater as Theron. But, anyhow, we had a lot of fun with that. He was a great debate partner, and we could all tell some stories, but I always got a kick out of the fact that he would hammer some of these people like Zell Miller, and then all of a sudden, at the very end, Zell Miller said, "Okay, let me leak something to you. Let me have you write something about one of my enemies."
You scratch my back, I'll
That's
scratch
right.
yours, right? There, and I love reading about the history between him and Zell Miller.
Oh man, I mean, I think, you know, shout out to AJC for actually doing that article, and Maria Supporter also did an article that highlighting his life, and they highlighted the relationship he had between Zell Miller and Chief of Staff Keith Mason and others quoted. But the one thing I respected most about Bill Shipp is that he was insightful, he was smart, but he followed the facts wherever they went. And whether you're a Democrat or Republican, he was going to do the facts. And I just remember watching him on the Georgia Gang. I think he was on the Georgia Gang for 10 years as a young person, you know, growing up in this state. And then lastly, I just remember always wanting to go to his column. What is Bill Shipp going to say about this? And he just called balls and strikes. And I just think that, you know, he lived a great life, and just want to offer my condolences.
Martha.
Yeah, he was such a great guy. Many times, we were the ones that drove the farthest when we were on the gang together, and we always got here first. And so we got a lot of time to talk as the guys that were coming close came in late. He hated for people to be late. But I also had the honor of him interviewing me for my papers being put in the University of Georgia Special Collection Library. They asked him to come and do the interview for that. And I got to see him get an honor for the civil rights work that he did at the University of Georgia. Gene McHugh and I, a former head of the station, went and represented Channel 5 for that. So I loved Bill Shipp. He was crusty and difficult, and he blamed me for everything every Republican ever did, but I loved him.
Old school journalist for sure. He was a remarkable man. Stay tuned, everyone, for Winners and Losers.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
With you this week.
My winner, of course, is going to be Bill Shipp. And I know we talked a lot about him. I won't say any more, but he was a great guy. And my loser I got just as I was coming in. President Biden's numbers for his first fundraising period were $72 million, $14 million less than Barack Obama did in the same period. And there's inflation. So that's something for Democrats to worry about.
Theron.
Who I want to respond to that, but no. DeKalb County homeowners, CEO Michael Thurman this week announced a $147 million property tax break. This will translate to about $1,400 tax cuts for the average DeKalb County citizen with a home value of $275,000. And also want to make Chris Eubanks, who just wrapped up his legendary run at Wilmington. This is an Atlanta native who went to Westlake High School and also Georgia Tech. So big shout out to Chris Eubanks. I know we're going to welcome him back in a big way.
He's got it.
I have to agree with.
Sweet smile too. I can't wait to see him.
He's been setting records.
Good player.
And he's coming here to Atlanta to play in the Open.
Atlanta Open,
Yeah.
which is a big tournament.
Yes.
Tournament.
Phil.
Well, and that's my winner too. So also, Bill Shipp, of course, is my winner. We're going to be agreeing on a lot of things. The loser is that reporter from the AJC, Alan Judd, who did not explain the other side of how UGA effectively reacted to the sexual charges. And Michelin Restaurants is now going to be doing restaurant reviews here in Atlanta. That's going to be really great.
And exciting. Melita.
Well, I agree with Christopher Eubanks. I loved the Guardian article that said he had the wingspan of an eagle and the personality that could charm bees from a buttercup.
He's 6'7".
6'7", yeah. And then my other winner is Sally Bethea, whose new book, Keeping the Chattahoochee, is now out. We all owe her a debt of gratitude for her service as the first river keeper for the Chattahoochee. And she and Shirley Franklin will be talking about this book on September the 12th at the Carter Presidential Library, if you want to put it on your calendar.
Well, and considering what's happening with the Chattahoochee, we owe her a lot of thanks for monitoring that river, even though she's in retirement, but she started that program. So,
yes.
All right, everyone, thanks so much for joining us. We will see you again next week. Make it a great one. Bye-bye.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.